Hi, I'm artist Lillian Gray, and today I would like to tell you about the famous Rorke's Drift Art and Craft Center. This is a quick reminder that you can shop various worksheets based on Rorke's Drift on our Teachers Pay Teachers store. They are specifically designed for multiple age groups and are fun to do. The Rorke's Drift Arts and Crafts Centre has been described as the most famous indigenous art centre in South Africa. It is world-renowned and celebrated for its pottery, tapestries and printmaking. This centre gave rise to some of Southern Africa's most celebrated artists. These include artists like Azaria Mbatha, Muafangejo and Cyprian Shilakoe, known for their printmaking. Then there is the celebrated weaver Allina Ndebele and the remarkable ceramicists Gordon Mbatha, Dinah Molefe, and Elizabeth Mbatha. These artists are only a selection of a large group of black artists who studied at the Rorke's Drift Arts and Crafts Centre. The centre played a crucial role in South African art history and is still influencing artists today. So what made Rorke's Drift so unique, and why do you need to know about it? Here are 5 main reasons. Come along as I share this remarkable story of triumph, tenacity, and talent. Reason number 1. The Rorke's Drift Arts and Crafts Centre offered arts and craft training for black people during the oppressive apartheid regime. During this time, apartheid policies denied a formal education to black people. This centre blossomed into an exceptional space where people of all races were mixed to share ideas, insights, and skills. Not only were people from different races, but also from various African and international countries. Truly unique for the times. Later, the centre also established a fine arts school with a 3-year diploma for black students. One of the only other art schools available to black artists in the country at the time was the Polly Street Art Centre in Johannesburg. Needless to say, the apartheid government disapproved of these establishments, but more on this later. The initial idea behind the Rorke's Drift Arts and Crafts Centre started in Sweden and not in South Africa. People abroad have been hearing about people suffering under apartheid. A Lutheran church in Sweden wanted to alleviate the hardship in the apartheid homelands of South Africa. And so the concept of selling African arts in Sweden was born. 2 trained artists, Peter and Ulla Gouvenier, were sent to South Africa. Their initial idea was not to start an art school, but to teach arts and crafts in the rural hospitals to patients. The hospital was filled with recovering TB patients. Peter and Ulla were meant to teach them craft as a form of occupational therapy. However, when the Gouvenier couple saw the oppressive apartheid regime in action, their aim changed. They wanted people to feel in charge of their lives. So this famous art centre started inside a small, tiny rural hospital in Zululand. And once it grew popular, the centre required more space and moved to its own buildings. These buildings were abandoned and located at the scene of the famous Rorke's Drift battle, an infamous battle between the Zulus and the British Empire. Because the centre was a church initiative, it was initially called the Evangelical Lutheran Church Art and Craft Centre, in short ELC. However, it became simply known as Rorke's Drift. Initially, 3 leading production studios were established at Rorke's Drift: weaving, fabric printing, and pottery. These are basic craft skills, so what made Rorke's Drift creations so unique? Glad you asked, and it leads me to point number 2. Rorke's Drift created a unique fusion of European practices mixed with African storytelling and styles. European teachers were careful not to influence their African students too much. They wanted them to maintain their Africanacity. The founding couple deliberately decided that teachers should focus on teaching art techniques and impose as little as possible on students' unique African heritage. It was a delicate combination of technical assistance and traditional African storytelling. Rorke's Drift became a hub of creativity and individuality. The artists developed diverse styles and grew their own voices. In the weaving department, some functional rugs were made. However, it is in the tapestries that we see a unique creative style taking shape. Apprentice weavers were encouraged to achieve artistic independence and weave their own designs. The tapestries were usually figurative, not abstract, and incorporated scenes from folklore, village life, Bible stories, or important events. Allina Ndebele is celebrated today for her freestyle weaving and sharing Zulu folklore stories. In the pottery department, some traditional Zulu and Sotho coil methods were used. After all, clay pots have been made in Africa for generations. However, the designs were conservative and hardly changed over the years. At Rorke, students learned complex skill methods. They were also taught how to produce functional tableware for urban consumers. But what made Rorke pottery so unique was that the students were encouraged to be creative and develop their own designs. This individualism gave rise to a new style of pottery that is still easily recognizable today. The women continued using the traditional methods, working by hand, creating more organic, free forms. The men preferred the kickwheel and decorated their pots with the sgraffito technique. This gender branching style in the studio's ceramics, women coiling, men throwing, is still how it's being done to this day at the Art Centre. The pottery was distinctive, individual, and essentially African. Though much of the pottery is functional, some are sculptural, such as the works of Dinah Molefe and Elizabeth Mbatha. Today, these ceramics are the most sought after. Of all the arts and crafts created at Rorke, it is the prints that fetch the highest prices at art auctions today. The most famous prints can be spotted quickly for their well-known Rorke style. There are even artists copying this style that never even attended the school. But why? The center didn't create cookie-cutter artists. Everyone was encouraged to develop the unique style. So how did this idea of a coherent Rorke's drift style take root? It's mainly due to the popularity and success of two artists, Azaria Mbatha and John Muafangejo. Sales were of great importance to Rorke students. They needed a sustainable income. Artist Mbatha and Muafangejo's works sold. Therefore, they were greatly admired and emulated by others. Azaria Mbatha played a fundamental role at the Rorke School. He left to train at a prestigious art school in Sweden. He then returned to Rorke to teach. Students were eager to learn from this artist and hear about his experiences abroad. It is quite natural that other students wanted to emulate him. Today, many artists also copy Muafangejo's style to pay homage to him as a form of respect. Nevertheless, it's important to remember that various artists with diverse styles were present at Rorke. The official catalogue compiled by Philippa Hobbs of Rorke artists include over 80 artists associated with the project. Just look at this wonderful diversity of print styles. Let's move on to point number 3. My favorite point, by the way. The most remarkable thing about the fine art created at Rorke is that it contains hidden messages. How cool is that? At the time in South Africa, apartheid restricted freedom of communication and expression. You couldn't just pipe up and say, "This government sucks." According to Ulla, words were dangerous. Hidden metaphors allowed students to critique the apartheid regime and promote a better, inclusive future for South Africa during censorship. Saying these things out loud would have had severe consequences. Ulla and Peter wanted students to express themselves. They wanted them to develop a strong voice. However, they had to be very careful. Informants were everywhere, even at Rorke. At the time, anybody against apartheid was labeled a communist, and an alleged communists were treated like a terrorist. Peter and Ulla chose not to discuss politics with the students, but rather to encourage storytelling. Because Peter wanted the students to be true to their roots, he was disappointed when Azaria Mbatha insisted on depicting Bible stories. However, he was soon astonished. Early on, when arts and crafts were still being taught in the tiny rural hospital, Azaria Mbatha produced an astonishing artwork. He depicted the biblical story of David and Goliath, but with a bit of a twist. David was black, holding the severed head of a white Goliath. The Israelites were represented as black people, their exalted status suggested by the fancy robes they wore. The enemy, the Philistines, were represented as white, dressed in short military tunics, running away in terror. The use of black and white in this lino cut speaks directly to the racial tensions in apartheid South Africa. The stark contrast of black and white also depicts the struggle between good and evil. Usually, black is used to represent evil, and white to depict good. This artwork flips this conventional belief on its head. Peter was amazed. A conquering black man was so refreshing, in contrast to the typical image of a suffering African. Peter quickly realized that this print held a message that was forbidden at the time in South Africa. It was using a biblical story to make a political statement. However, this message could slip past censorship. You see, the apartheid regime saw themselves as Christians. They would not restrict or censor Bible stories. Peter learned through Mbatha's work that religious subject matter could carry other meanings and be a conduit for social political comment. Mbatha's David, as a young African hero, occupying the high moral ground and defeating a white Goliath, was a prediction of a triumphant outcome to the racial oppression. Another notable work is a tapestry called The Hungry Lion. Sadly, the artist is unknown. It was one of the first tapestries to be created at the Rorke Center. It tells the story of a hungry lion that came to a village. The lion ate everyone until only one man was left. It was the cruel dip inspector, Mr. Van der Walt. He was mean, fat, and sadistic. He punished his workers with a whip, tearing their skin off their backs. The lion was so incredibly hungry, when only Mr. Van der Walt was left, the lion proceeded to eat him as well. Since he was a bad person, he got stuck in the lion's throat. The lion was poisoned and became seriously ill. He vomited Mr. Van der Walt out and started to heal. However, Mr. Van der Walt did not return. He died by rotting away slowly from his injuries. Due to Mr. Van der Walt, the lion vowed to no longer eat human flesh. The people could now return to their village and live a better, safer life. The weaver was embarrassed to share the story with the class. It was clear that the tapestry held a great truth. The lion symbolized the man's insatiable greed. Mr. Van der Walt represented the apartheid policies. The work was a warning to the government. It was often told in the man's culture, a silly story meant to generate laughter and hope. Colonialism brought Christianity to Africa, and over time an African form of Christian worship was born. At Rorke's Drift, Azaria Mbatha began to depict the Africanization of Bible stories. At first, it was not a political statement, but rather an attempt to imagine biblical events taking place in South Africa. Mbatha's depiction of the birth of Jesus is a departure from the conventional nativity scene. It depicts a bold, bearded African Joseph and a black Mary. To the side, we see a lion and King Herod lurking in the jungle. The three wise men arrive on an elephant's back. The scene also portrays various African animals. There is even a bush pig. This is definitely set in Africa, forcing us to view the nativity through fresh eyes. Over time, his biblical scenes started to criticize the apartheid policies, advocating for unity. In several of his prints, we find faces that are half white and half black. It shows that Christ is the Redeemer of all people, not a savior for one ethnic group alone. He established the idea of a biblical black God that originated in Africa who would save black and white people alike. This message was not unique to Azaria Mbatha. Other Rorke Drift artists also advocated for equality and harmony between all races. In Jacob Matsotse's lino cut called Forgiveness, we see two large hands holding Jesus on the cross. One hand is white and the other is black. They suggest a dual ethnicity that seems to flow from one human. We also see the dual Christ in John Muafangejo's artworks. The Rorke Drift Arts and Crafts Centre created a platform for artists to express themselves and criticize the government with their metaphors, stories, and symbols. The prints often held complex stories and meanings. Artworks were not only a source of income, but also a tool to contribute to social change. As the school grew, and over time students became more political, and artworks became outright protest art, which is explained more in my next point. Number 4. The centre's grit and perseverance against the apartheid authorities. This centre blatantly went against the authorities of the time, who was pro-segregation of races. However, from the start, the apartheid government couldn't really interfere with the school too much. This was because the art school was a church initiative. The Apartheid National Party proclaimed to be followers of Christ, yet they branded people, classified them, and created hatred and violence. But they couldn't just shut down this church operation. However, there were existing apartheid controls that they could use. According to apartheid law, all non-whites in South Africa had to carry a passbook. It was designed to control the movement of black Africans. Blacks needed to carry these books at all times when they were not in the demarcated homeland areas. Black people often had to violate the pass laws and thus lived under constant threat of fines, harassment, and arrests. The government used these books to monitor and track Rorke students' movements and sometimes hampered their education. There was this ongoing fear that students and workers could get evicted at any time from the Rorke Arts and Crafts Centre. You see, the existence of the school really vexed the apartheid government. The initial aim of Rorke was to create a school wholly managed and taught by Africans. Local African artists were sent to Sweden for training, and on their return worked as teachers at the centre. Various black students were educated and trained to manage specific areas in the school, such as bookkeeping and cooking, and other departments related to the general running of the centre. This was extremely rare during apartheid. You see, apartheid had an economic incentive. It needed cheap labor for the booming mining industry. For black people to keep working in these harsh conditions, it was imperative that they remain uneducated. Bantu education aimed to train the children manual labor and menial jobs that the government deemed suitable for those of their race. It was intended to embed the idea that black people were to accept being subservient to white South Africans. As you can see, the training offered at Rorke was not designed to keep black people in the labor force. To the apartheid government's horror, the Swedish church also created a market for African arts and crafts abroad. At first, the church sold Rorke products only in Sweden. Ulla used this to the school's advantage. She informed the authorities that the school has become famous in Sweden and it would reflect really poorly on them if they closed it down. Initially, this argument aided with visa extensions and passport controls for students. As the school became popular in Sweden, products started selling in other parts of Europe and later in the United States. Initially, a substantial portion of the work was exported to generate income. However, Rorke products quickly also gained popularity amongst the South African white middle class, and this was due to the exceptional quality of the goods created at Rorke. The history of Rorke is complex and cannot be covered in this video in detail. Here's a quick overview so that you can understand how apartheid impacted the fine arts department specifically. The first phase of the art school witnessed the evolution of several significant artists. Eventually, all these artists moved on. New leadership came and went, and by the mid-70s, a new generation of artists and teachers arrived. The centre focused more on developing the curriculum into an intensive 3-year arts diploma. Under the directorship of Jules and Ada van der Vyver, various new printmaking techniques were added, such as screen printing, dry point, and etching. They also introduced photography as a subject. 1976 was the time of the Soweto uprising, signalling the beginning of an intense new wave of anti-apartheid revolt inside the country and an increasing campaign of boycotts internationally. Various internal and external factors started to hamper the development of the fine arts department at Rorke. The government started to clamp down. They would refuse visas for art teachers. They would give existing teachers 24-hour notice to leave the country, forcing them to return to Sweden. This created staff shortages at Rorke. Finding qualified teachers to keep the fine arts department running became almost impossible. The high staff turnover caused an incoherent curriculum in the fine arts department. Together with many international countries, Sweden announced their first sanction on South Africa. This intensified the apartheid's disruption at Rorke. One teacher remembers a visit by police helicopters with a load of police dropping in for inspection. At other times, special services snooped in and asked various questions. Jules and Ada van der Vyver described living and working at Rorke in the second half of the 70s as very exciting but also intense. At one stage, the authorities declared the Rorke farm a whites-only area, making it impossible for black students to get to classes. There also appears to have been tension between the fine arts and craft departments at the centre. The fine arts section cost the church money, whereas the craft section generated income. The fine arts students tended to come to the centre from the cities and were more politically motivated, while the people attending the craft department were primarily from the rural homelands. New fine arts students had lived through the Sharpeville massacre, the Soweto youth uprising, and Steve Biko's death in detention. These were crucial influences in the students' thinking, and the art moved from subtle messages to outright protest art. Artist Tommy Yali created a lino cut called Our People's Leader. Yali felt that many of his peers at the centre needed to be politicized. His work aimed not only at his peers but also targeted the leaders of the struggle. In this liner cut, he pleads for them to recommit themselves to the cause. The apparent reluctance is addressed in the subtle inscription on the work, "For the sake of our weaker brothers." Heart in the Oven is a woodcut done by Avashoni Manganye. Combines more familiar icons of civil conflict, Hector Peterson's body being carried and police vehicles patrolling. It does offer an unexpected message of hope as a dove appears to fly out of the dead boy's mouth. The two enormous hands that emerge from the heavens on either side of the bird seems to offer a divine blessing, perhaps an acceptance that this violence will achieve freedom. Student Tony Nkotsi produced the artwork Portrait of a Man in 1982, a liner cut that captures the likeness of Biko, alert and alive, although having already sustained the fatal injury that marks his temple. His hands almost seem to reach out of the picture plane towards us. He holds a key engraved with the letters RSA. RSA stands for the Republic of South Africa. It suggests that Biko and the principles he stood for provided the key to unlocking a better future for South Africa. Eventually, the fine arts section at Rorke closed in 1982. It was a great shock to many people in the art community of South Africa. Even though the fine arts department did not survive apartheid, it was still a remarkable space and a worthy achievement for the time. The founders, Peter and Ulla Gouvenier, and all the teachers involved over the years, achieved what many today would consider impossible. They empowered black students to generate their own income. They offered education outside the segregated Bantu education system. They created a community in which everyone mattered. They produced internationally acclaimed African artists. It became a model for many centers that were established afterwards in Southern Africa. Fine art diploma graduate students filtered into many areas of South African life and became educators at various centers. It could be said that the expertise taught at Rorke aided the political struggle directly. The artists made banners, t-shirts, and posters, all using Rorke printmaking skills. It enabled various black students to study abroad. Allina and Azaria received training in Sweden and returned to teach at the center, something extremely rare during the apartheid regime. It also aided Azaria Mbatha in immigrating to Sweden permanently. There, Azaria completed studies in social sciences and achieved a doctorate in African historical symbolism. Allina Ndebele eventually stopped teaching at Rorke and opened her own business. Rorke grew an international audience and appreciation for African arts and crafts. All of this was achieved at the center, despite the obstructive apartheid government at the time. Looking at history, art often seemed to flourish under political oppression and prohibition. According to Peter, apartheid contributed to the development of Rorke. The rules of apartheid created a bunch of frustrated but creative humans who needed to express themselves. The craft center did survive. It is still operating today, and you can purchase authentic Rorke pottery, tapestries, rugs, baskets, and hand-printed materials. This legacy of high-quality African craftsmanship flows into my final point. Number 5. The Rorke Art and Craft Center kept a meticulous catalogue of all craft objects produced at the center. All craft objects created, such as pottery and weaving, were marked with this distinct leaf logo. Each item was assigned a number and catalogued according to the manufacturing date and the artist's name. This means all the crafts can be tracked back to Rorke. The fine art students at Rorke were also taught to catalogue their artwork and keep a sales record. Printmaking techniques enable artists to do print runs of the same designs. Professional artists decide how many prints to print of one carving or etch. They are numbered and kept to a limited print run. Artists who studied at Rorke were encouraged to record everything they produced meticulously. They were taught to limit print runs by cancelling a woodblock, etch, or lino. This means this block has been cancelled. It prevents this artwork from ever getting reprinted. Art investors love detailed records because the work can be traced back to the artist, proving that it is an original work. It also makes it much harder for fakes to enter the market, and this enables the artwork to increase rapidly in value over the years. And that's it for my video on the remarkable Rorke Arts and Crafts Center. I am artist Lillian Gray, and I love teaching art and art history. Remember to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified when a new video is released. This is a reminder that you can shop various worksheets for all ages online on our Teachers Pay Teachers website. Connect with us on social media and let us know what video you would like to see next. Until next time!